All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to have you here this afternoon. We're excited to be talking about offloads, backup, and kind of just taking care of your media, especially when it comes to you spent a ton of time shooting your project, hopefully on pre-production before that. But shooting your project, you may have multiple cameras, you might have lots of data, you may be shooting in just HD still, whatever it is. That media is kind of like the distillation of all of that work. And once you've created those files, you don't want to lose those. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today. So we're excited to have Paul from Hedge with us here today. And so Hedge is a software that we use for those backups things. We've been using it for quite a while now, back even when it was originally just on the Mac, and now it's Windows and Mac. So he has a lot of expertise on that side. We also have, JC is here along with us as well. So say hi, JC, so that we can see you. Awesome. There we go. So JC, I'm going to kind of let you guide the conversation here. I know you've done a little bit more on the DIT stuff than I have, whether it's with features and TV shows and things like that. So for those who don't know, DIT, digital imaging technician, they're kind of in charge of preserving that information on set and bringing that into the pipeline. So JC, if you want to kind of kick us off and bring us into it.
Sure. Yeah, as you transfer files, it is really important to make sure you don't lose any of the valuable footage. So I'm excited to be on with Paul Matthijs. Did I get that right? He's a CEO. He's not just from Hedge. He's the CEO of Hedge. And I've been using Hedge for, I don't know, years. I love it. It's very easy. We'll get more into Hedge. I'd love to just start with a bit of an introduction, Paul, of who you are, what some of your background is, and how did Hedge come about?
It's an interesting story. It's I actually am a live sound engineer. So I work with bands, I toured with bands, and at some point, when you do a lot of tours, then in between tours, you want to do something else. So I did a lot of mastering, and when you're mastering, it's a bit like grading in videos. You know a lot about the pipeline, so you get asked to consult on earlier stages for that too. And then at some point, you roll into broadcast and TV and features, and then suddenly you're called a DIT. But my focus wasn't on camera. I would say a DIT's main expertise is camera, and data handling is part of it, but mostly it's camera and sensor. And my expertise was mostly hardcore data pipelines. So we have a lot of data going through that needs to be moving fast. Fast storage was my forte. And then at some point I got asked by a Dutch broadcaster to help out with this weird project that they were having. They were doing a documentary which was shot live with 15 5Ds. And they needed it synced into Avid overnight. And 5Ds and Avid are quite far from each other. And this was a season, so they were doing 8 days of shooting, consecutive days of shooting. And each day was 12 hours of 15 cameras footage. That needed to be cut down because they didn't have a script on before, and they needed to just film everything, all angles, everything they could come up with, and then cut it down into edit. And that's why they needed the turnover to be so fast, because each episode would take a month of cutting down all those hours. And we started automating something with an Apple script, and then we automated a bit more. And then 4 seasons in, we had this whole automated pipeline into Avid with timecode sync and the whole shebang, our own DNX encoder to go from H.264 to DNX. And that was quite cool. And then we thought, well, there must be a market for that. Turned out in the Netherlands, where we're based, or most of our team nowadays is based, there is definitely not a market for that because it was way too bespoke. So we tried, instead of turning this into a service, we said, well, let's try to make it into a product so the whole world can join us. And because that workflow was so specific, we luckily realized we couldn't build that into a single app, or well, we could have sold maybe 1 or 2 of them. So we decided to start at the beginning with backups. Let's nail the backups first. That became Hedge. So we found some investors, and we built a small team around it. And then we doubled down for a few months, and then there was the first Hedge, which we could use on the 5th season of that show. So that was a great litmus test. And then we went live almost 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So
talk to us a little bit for folks that are maybe new to the idea of using software. Maybe they usually shoot things and they take their SD cards or hard drives or whatever format they've put the media onto, and they're going to create a backup, which we're assuming at this point that they understand the importance of having a backup and not just one copy. You want to make a backup of your footage, even if it's to just put it on a drive that's faster for editing or such. Why not just pop it in and drag the footage over to the hard drive?
well, that works
why
too.
use software to begin with? Yeah.
Well, let's start with saying Finder is amazing software, and Explorer to a certain extent too. But Finder really is awesome software. It doesn't get the praise it deserves. What it doesn't, though, is give you proof that a copy was done properly, that it's a true copy, because it wasn't built for huge files. It's built for super small system files where nothing is destructive. You can always redo it. But in video production, you, of course, trash the source as soon as possible because you want to reuse that card. Right. So for starters, you want to make more than one copy just to spread the load, preferably 3.
Yes.
Well, this happened to us on that original show called Challenge Day, and there was this data handler doing copies with Finder, which is okay if you check the footage later on. This was H.264, so if there's an issue with a file, you can still use parts of it, so not that destructive. But the cameras don't have unique names, so they needed to rename each file, which was tedious. The cards are all untitled, which is tedious too. So there's a lot of room for human error in that process. And that's where custom tailored software like Hedge steps in. So we needed something that would easily give us unique file names, unique card names, and also, if possible, a proof of a proper copy. And that's where checksum comes in. And it isn't as much about doing the checksum, it's about having the receipt in the end. So you know that the source matches with the destination. That's the most important part of the chain, because what is your destination will become a source later on. And then later on, that destination becomes a source again. So you need, at some point, a sort of chain of custody throughout the process. And you can't have that just by saying to someone, yeah, it copied fine, because you'll never know what fine meant, what the definition of fine was. And that's where a checksum comes in, which is a mathematical fingerprint of a file, which stays exactly the same throughout the process. And that way, person in, let's say you make 20 copies for some reason, if you still checksum the 20th copy and you have the first one, you'll know it's identical. So it just saves your ass. It really, gives you a lot of peace of mind. That's why it's called hedge, by the way. In Dutch, there's a saying to throw something across the hedge. It's like, well, now it's your problem. There you go. Don't bug me again. Don't call me. Well, there was quite a negative vibe on some sets because of that. So we said, well, let us be that hedge. We'll have your back. We'll make sure there's that proof of copying went right.
That's a fun story, Ewan, for the name of the business. That's cool. And I want to mention to folks that are early in the feed here it's hedge.video if you want to look it up, and hang with us for the live stream. We'll have information on how to get a discount on the software towards the end here. So yeah, that is the checksum verification checks are what are really important in the software. So one of the thoughts may be, doesn't that add a lot of extra time to an offload? I would rather just get it done faster. I understand the importance of it, but a lot of softwares add a lot of time with it. It can take a lot of time to verify. Talk to me about Hedge. How does Hedge use verification checks, and how much time does it add to an offload?
Well, it depends.
Of course.
I think for checksums, it's important to understand where this whole concept came from. About 10 years ago or 15 years ago, hard drives were really shitty. And so was Mac OS and Windows too. Those OSs really weren't mature. So you couldn't trust your hardware, you couldn't trust your software, so you needed a foolproof mechanism to tell you something that is trusted. And that's where checksum came in. So checksums are a super brute force way, slow way, therefore, of checking if what goes in is the same that goes out. And that nowadays the industry is really different. Hard drives are extremely reliable. Really, they don't die that much anymore. Even SSDs don't die that much. Right. This concept of bit rot, which used to be a thing, isn't really a thing anymore. So it isn't much about reliability. It's more about human error. Stuff will go wrong at some point. It happens, and you want to fix that as soon as you can and as early as you can, and catch those issues. And then the economics step in. Like how much can I afford to lose time-wise on such a mechanism? Right. Because everything takes time, of course. How much time really depends on the hardware. The CPUs are really great. Everybody has really a lot of RAM. I'm on a mediocre iMac with 32 gigs. Even. So that isn't the bottleneck anymore. I think the bottleneck, the main question here is, where are you going to delete your sources? Are you going to reuse your cards, and how soon? And everybody thinks there's one workflow in this industry, but there isn't. There are a lot of different ones. We see broadcast companies that have thousands of CF and SD cards because they don't erase media until the production has aired. On the other hand, there are feature films, Hollywood feature films, that shoot with 2 Red Max and reuse them multiple times a day. So who is the professional one? Both are. They just have a different backup strategy. If you're going to erase your cards, you do want to use source verification, because you can't recover your sources. You got to know that what you're copying has been the right copy. And not only copied right, but also read right. So you need source verification if you're going to erase your cards. If you're not going to erase your cards, you don't need source verification at that moment. So that saves you a lot of time. Sometimes getting extra cards is a lot cheaper than the OT you need for creating the extra backups. So it's a more producer's question in the end. If you, on the other end of the spectrum, take, for instance, Netflix's stance, which is, I would say, yeah, that's the other end of the spectrum. Netflix considers every source to be expendable. They don't say you can erase them. You can't, actually. You should hang on to them, but you got to expect that at some point a card dies on you. A Red Mac can die too. An SD card dies easily. So you got to assume that nothing exists the second you offloaded it. And that's why they treat every copy as an archive. And an archive requires a source verification and a destination verification that's independent of other destinations. And that's the longest process possible. That's a read from the source, a read again from the source in an independent way, write it to a destination, read it back from the destination. And as soon as there's an inconsistency, you got to redo that again, that process, and then fix it. What Hedge does, Hedge fixes those inconsistencies for you. So there isn't really an answer to that question, like how much longer does it take? It really depends on how your mechanism, how your backup strategy is. If you're going to hold on to your cards during production, you can be fast. Right. If you're going to assume everything is going to die the instant you touch it, it's going to be slow. And there's no best strategy.
But it's still not as slow as it would take to go back and recreate the footage that was lost or not done accurately. I mean, the value.
It's always cheaper to create multiple backups with source verification and destination verification at the same time. But then it comes down to how long will this take? And this is a mistake that is really often made in production. Producers think about how many terabytes of storage do we need for this production. That's not the question you need answering. You need to think about how fast do I need to move this many terabytes from A to B and then to C. Right. Because if you're, let's say production takes 4 terabytes and the producer says, well, then here you go, here are 2 or 3 4 terabyte drives. Cool, that's awesome. And maybe the turnaround of the cards isn't that fast, so you'll have oozes of time to fill those 4 terabytes. And then the producer goes into the post house, and it takes them a day to copy that 4 terabyte because it's a slow drive with a really slow read speed.
Right.
And so it's more about how fast do you need to move it? How fast do you need to move it off of those backups again? That's where, for instance, GTEx shuttles come in. They're like those RAID systems, like they're really fast to offload off, but they're faster even to move it away from it. And that's quite important too, because you're not going to add it straight from that backup most of the time.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good that's a really good clarification and point to think about. One is how much space do you need? 2, get backups of that. And then 3, the speed of those drives, or the cables, connections, the way it all those components of speed are really important to think about and consider. Also, one of the things I like about Hedge, I don't know that it's unique to Hedge, but I use Hedge and I like the feature, is that you can set it up to have multiple destinations that it's offloading to simultaneously. I've had the days where you plugged in a drive, you offload, you unplug it, plug in your next one. That does add a ton of time. And being able to have multiple plugged in at once and all offload at the same time to all of them is a huge time saver. What whether that's specific or not to Hedge, isn't really the point of, but I would love to hear what does make Hedge unique.
Well, from the start, that was the unique selling point. We said it's quite silly that most software, but even Finder, even if you copy the same data 3 times, it needs to read that data 3 times. Right. That's super silly. You don't need that. If you have enough RAM, you can do it with 1 time. So the main thing for Hedge from the get-go has been to create multiple destinations at the same time, multiple backups without a delay. So if you buy 3 drives that are about the same speed, then there's no bottleneck, no drive will be waiting on the other. That will just go as is. Of course, if one is a lot slower than the other, then there will be a bottleneck. So you got to match them a bit. And don't expect to buy 3 drives from the store and match them up. You got to test them, really. There can be quite a speed difference in between particular drives, even if they're the same from the same batch from the manufacturer. So you want to test those drives. So Hedge is really empirical software. We went for production and we learned a lot from that. And we said, well, we don't want to do this again. We don't want to do the boring stuff. So let's build software that fixes the boring stuff. I only want to connect everything once. And I want Hedge to handle that. So we connected 3 backups and a NAS in this case. We had 4 backups and we had 14 card readers because USB chipsets by then were 7 at the tops. So we had 14 card readers hooked up. And I just wanted to add cards. And then I didn't want to drag stuff around. So we built Hedge to automatically recognize the source and then automatically start the transfer after confirming the name, for instance. So we tried removing a lot of manual intervention as much as possible without going for a full automaton. Like full automation wasn't the way forward. You need some kind of intervention there, but as well, you shouldn't be doing repetition too much because repetition is asking for human error. And that's what I think led to Hedge's most famous thing, that it's easy to use and it doesn't take you a lot of time. The copy can take a lot of time, of course, because if you have a lot of data, it's going to take a while. But it shouldn't cost you a lot of time. You should have your hands free to do, well, more interesting stuff, even if it's just drinking coffee or having lunch. It doesn't have to be something with a camera, but doing backups manually, that's tedious. That's not worth it. Yeah. So we aim to, or we strive to build software that's nice to use, gives you a smile on your face, helps you with your day job, or evening or night job in our case often. And yeah, it's fun to use. It should be fun to use. It should be fun to look at. It shouldn't feel archaic. It should feel nice. It's like having an assistant. You don't want to have a grumpy assistant, or you don't want to have an intern that you need to show everything or learn everything. You want something that can think for themselves and let you know when they have a question, when it's a sound question. So you don't want them to be mute and just tag along. And that's what we try with the software too. So anytime we find something that we think we should make easier, or when we get a lot of feedback from customers, that helps a lot too. So they're saying, well, this is my use case, this is my workflow, I keep running into this. Can you think of something for that. And then we try to do that. So it should be pleasant to use. All our apps should be.
I think just really quick jumping in, I think it's really cool. Kind of, I love that I'm a designer as well as a filmmaker, and I love that it's not so many tools. Also, they tend to be, especially when they're data management or all these kinds of things. It's like you almost have to be very nerdy just to understand the user interface and these kind of things. And I find it's just very simple. Just open it, back it up. And that part I really appreciate. Another thought I was thinking in terms of kind of jumping back, JC, to what you said earlier of like why should we care about backups and verifying data and stuff like that. And I think what Paul you said was important as well, because it's kind of like on-set safety in some ways is a similar thing where if you're just doing one project a year, like maybe that doesn't make sense because you can spend the time and the energy to actually go and double check everything, get info, check the sizes of everything and whatnot. But ultimately, the more repetition, the more you're doing it, the more chances for user error there is. So if it's just once in a while that you happen to do it, using Finder is great. But when you're doing this a lot, having some way, because it tends to be, and oftentimes, in my case, oftentimes I'm, I'll shoot something and I'll be offloading it. It's the end of the day. I'm tired. It's so easy to miss stuff. So having something that's able to kind of like copy that data, there's nothing like the feeling of looking in the folder like months later when you come to edit and you can't find it and you're just like, oh man, did we miss this? And it's just not worth that. So that's why having a software like Hedge, I think, is really important. But maybe JC too, just kind of before we go too far, I know just some people in the chat, I feel like maybe bring it to kind of a more basic level. So maybe some more like one-man band shooters and stuff like that. Like what are some practical like workflow tips in terms of, it's almost like data security in a sense of like what's a good workflow in a kind of a DIT process. And honestly, JC or Paul, you guys could probably both kind of jump in and speak to that. You guys have both done it in different various ways. Just to kind of a simplified version, I'm sure it'll be oversimplified in some ways, but what are some tips for people maybe a little bit more newer to this whole idea of it's just rather than just copying it from the card over to the computer? What's some better ways of doing that?
I would say before you even think about how to copy things, care about your setup. You want to use power everywhere. So if you're on a MacBook Pro, power the MacBook Pro. That sounds silly maybe, but a lot of people don't, and that kills your speed. Same goes for hubs. If you're using a USB hub or a Thunderbolt dock, use one with an external AC. It saves you a lot of speed, 40, 50, 60%. Wow. Easily. Don't use those USB tag-on docks. Don't, because that chipset in there overheats easily, and that will, well, it won't slow down your transfer because it just skipped the data, and it won't let you know.
Oh, interesting.
So spend some money on proper peripherals. That really, really helps. And then, especially if you're a one-man band or two-man band, that means you have a lot of hats, a lot of ground to cover. So you want to get rid of everything that is not, well, I would say creative, if possible. Like you're not going to do camera tests on set. You're going to do that on beforehand. That's really normal. Do the same with your data management. Do your setup during your camera test, do a few shoots, see how fast it is, compare to how many minutes you're going to shoot that day or hours. See how much time it's going to cost you. Because nobody likes offloading media at the end of the day when everybody's packing up, or you're packing up yourself and you got to wait for your laptop, or you got to relocate and then you got to drive home and do it again back at home or in the studio. Yep. The same goes for don't offload at the end of the day. The second you can offload, start doing it. Hedge and a lot of other software have duplicate detection, really sturdy duplicate detection, where it doesn't really matter if you pop in a card that has been offloaded before partially. Just start offloading as soon as you've shot something. Put in a new card if you need to shoot more, or put it in the laptop just to offload a few clips and put it back in the camera. But as soon as you have downtime, start offloading. Everything helps. It's really nice to be able to finish your last shot and knowing it will only take 10 minutes to offload.
That's really
That's the I would say that that's the best to just relieve your stress for the day, because shooting is stressy.
yeah.
Every production is stressy.
Well, I think it's a really good point too, because especially as like SD card sizes keep growing, or whether it's CF cards and things like that, like depending on what you're shooting. If you're shooting RAW, obviously usually you have to switch out a lot quicker, but especially with compression rates being better and all those kinds of things, like you can have literally they make SD cards that are like a terabyte, which is honestly, in my opinion, not a great idea, because it's just I'd rather not walk around with that much all on one device. But like you said, like actually, that's something I guess I didn't realize, or I haven't really utilized before, is like not like literally just doing it as you go through. So that's a great idea. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Hedge also comes with a sidecar app for iOS and Android called Connect, and it gives you live statuses on your transfers and also push notifications. It's a free companion app, and
I love that.
That really helps with doing small cruise shoots. So you can walk to the laptop with might be, or the offload station, which might be 100 yards away, or even further than that. You pop in your card, and you'll get a ping when it's done, and that's when you do a card swap. You don't do a card swap when it's full, but you do the card swap as soon as you can. That helps pushing through the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, because then too,
nobody's going to get hurt if you do 10 offloads a day or 20 offloads.
Right. Well, and it also saves you a ton of time in the sense of like, if you wait, you have a terabyte of data from shooting all day, and then that can take a long time to transfer all of that. Then you've got to wait up for it and then make sure everything's ready. So yeah, no, that's a great point.
I've even done them at a minimum, like at lunch, and then at the evening, to just start trying to break that up. Because sometimes it's slow shooting, in the morning, you're getting stuff set up or whatever it is. But yeah, the idea of not waiting to the end of the day is brilliant. The only other thing I would add is using a battery backup system that you can plug into the wall, and it's got battery power, so that if somehow the power that you're on, whether it's on a generator or whatever it is, or whatever power source you're using for all the hard drives and everything else plugged in, it'll provide enough time on the battery for you to turn all those things off and unplug them, or finish, as it may be. That can be really helpful in making sure you don't lose footage, as well as just having that battery. There's a lot of different brands of them, and different sizes. You'll need to test, know how large your drives are, how much how much power it's pulling, and then get one big enough to handle all of that. I use those a lot, especially if you're doing stuff remote, or it's the power source is a little unreliable. Having a battery backup is, I would say, almost imperative, because if once that goes off, like, it can kill things, and that's bad for transferring.
No kidding.
Really bad.
No kidding. Really quick, just want to remind you guys too that you feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we'll kind of take those here as we get closer towards the end. If there's anything you have specifically questions, whether it's for Paul or for JC, or just kind of on the subject of DIT and offloads and management on that side, definitely do that. But JC, I'll kind of hand it back to you.
Yep. What would you say, like, who is Hedge for? But almost the question of, who is it not for? Is there any situation where something's so big or so complex or so nuanced that you say, yeah, one of the other softwares is better if you're trying to do this? That's a little outside the scope of Hedge. Hedge is better situated for this person in this situation. How would you draw some of those lines and define some of that audience?
I think that line is pretty clear. If you're on a feature film and you're shooting a lot of cards, and you have a full, for instance, ASUS pipeline, where you're going to go for dailies, you're going to go for the metadata pipeline, you have a lot of LUTs to manage, I would use SilverStack for that, for the initial copy. What we see with a lot of customers, that they use SilverStack as sort of the project management, and then use a Hedge for all the extra backups, because it's a lot faster that way. So they can shuttle media even on set between DIT village, camera village, wherever they need to go to, even on set edit nowadays. Everything else, Hedge works brilliantly. We have customers, adventure filmers, that use Hedge on our iPad. We have we have just released Mono. That's our iPad version. And on the other hand, it's being used on large Netflix series too, as the sole tool. So if you need to move data, it works. It works for every camera. It works for every data load. We even have customers that are using it not for cameras, but to manage migration from NAS to NAS. So they're doing 40, 50, 60 terabyte transfers. Instead of multiple backups, they're just doing one transfer. It takes a long time, but because the network tends to fail, if a network drops, then often you got to restart your transfer. But with Hedge's duplicate engine, that doesn't matter. It just picks up where it left off. So you can just keep restarting the transfer. So that helps them. So there's quite a wide range where you can use Hedge. And I would say only if you're going to do a live grade on set together with an ASUS pipeline, I would go for something like SilverStack. But that's quite niche. And if you're going into that direction, then probably ColorFront is going to be an alternative as well. And then we're talking in quite a different pricing category.
No, that's good. I have a question on Hedge, where if you say we're doing like a 3 camera, or you can do more than that, but let's just for simplicity say 3 cameras, filming either a live event or training content. How I usually set up the folder structure, and then in Hedge you can very easily go through and select which camera it has to go into. So there'll be 3 A cam, or well, that's doing 3 cards a day, but there'll be A, B, and C, and you're doing multiple cards a day. You have to go make all of your individual A, card 1, A, card 2, A, card 3, B, card 1. So I was realizing recently that Hedge has presets.
It does.
So would you then, I would assume if your card was titled or had the A or B or C, that would be one way of setting up the preset to read that as part of your file name that it creates through Hedge. If when you format the cards or something, they're untitled and it's erasing that information, would you then just set up 3 presets, one for A, B, and C, so you could set the file names A, B, and C? Or how would you go about doing that for 3 different cameras, and you have multiple cards per day, so that it's giving you multiple ABC with advancing numbers across multiple days even?
If you're on a multicam shoot and your main camera or even your B cam has proper naming, like a camera letter and then an identifier, I would do a preset based on the camera, because a rep typically takes a different folder structure, or you want a different part in your Sony, or maybe the pipeline is that you want to have the RAW from the rep, but MP4s from a Sony B cam if you were going to match that. So I would, if the camera supports the drive letter, use that. And then if you have something like a B-roll or some other cameras like, let's say a GoPro or an untitled card, use a label instead of that. So you manually you put a source in Hedge and you click the name, you'll see a blue label occur, and you're sort of renaming the card without actually renaming the card. And that trickles down to your renaming a folder structure. And that's a really fast way just to know I'm plugging in this untitled card, but I know this is my C cam. I know it's real 6, make it C006, done. That's a lot faster. So labels are quite a hidden treat. Once you learn that, you can do a lot with them, because you can create folder structures within labels. So if I would say, for instance, say I have this card, sound devices came in. My sound devices recording came in. I want to put this in some subfolder without going in and selecting a subfolder. I'll put in a label sound/747/A. Then 3 folders will be created from that automatically. So you can incorporate that label pretty good within a preset. If you don't have cameras with letters, like an old Sony shoot, I would do a preset per camera. So the A cam, the B cam, the C cam. And if you do have drive letters on your cards, I would use them for camera specific presets. And presets are the reason why it took us 5 years to build presets in, is because presets are a beast. The second you can do a preset, you can make it super hard for yourself. So we wanted to find a way to make it really easy to use a preset. And that took us a long while to find, because the problem with the preset is that there are many different dimensions they can do. Are you doing production and then say location and then a camera card number and then the camera type, or are you basing your presets on camera type and then adding the rest later on? And there's so many cross sections possible. So you want to keep it simple. Do it either for camera letter or do it for camera type, I'd say.
Yeah, good. That makes sense. And then tell us about some of the upcoming updates for Hedge. You were mentioning before we got onto this, you were mentioning there's some new things on the horizon.
There are always are. We do, yeah. Well, we quite dislike the model of apps doing an 18-month to 2-year cycle of updates. So you got to wait 18 months because the vendor is building up features with enough business value to charge you again for an upgrade, while you need that feature now. So we decided from the get-go, we're going to do it differently. We're going to build features, and as soon as they're done, we're going to release them. And we'll find a different model for charging for upgrades. If people want them, they can pay for it, but you don't need to upgrade. And as such, after 5 years now, we've settled into this rhythm that we do it 4 to 5 major releases for Hedge and few for the other apps too. So we did 3 for CoolCat, our reporting app, and 2 for Canister this year, for instance. The 4th one for Hedge is coming next week. And that is a bit of a different thing. We always build major features, but now after 5 years, we've created such a backlog with nifty ideas that for 3 months, we're going to run through all those ideas and see which ones we can build in. So the next update isn't so much about a major feature, it's more an amalgam of things that make organizing media even better. So you'll be able to sort your media on Offload based on the file name, for instance, or based on the file extension. So let's say you have a hard drive with a huge backlog of photos or stills on there or stock footage. You can automatically sort them on creation date into a folder structure. Or you have a card with ProRes on there and RAW. You can split them into 2 different folder structures automatically, things like that. And we're also ignoring bundles, so you can easily get rid of those AVCHD files nobody uses.
Yes.
And some more stuff like that. So we're gonna focus for, I think 3 months on all the small bits. Like here's one that everybody runs into at some point. If your USB hub has an issue, it won't tell you, but the macOS system profile will detect something is wrong and it will scale it down to USB 2, speed-wise. And then suddenly your card is slow, but nobody tells you that. So we're going to build in detection for that in Hedge too. So if you have a USB 3 device, but it doesn't get enough power, we'll tell you before you start the upload, for instance. Nifty things like that don't really justify a major upgrade, but are very useful in the field, we hope.
I love it. I love it. I like all the little things, making things even easier and better. That's fantastic. One other question that's come to mind is when should you keep the entire folder structure that your camera creates? And when is it okay to just take the video files out of that folder structure and copy those?
Ask your post supervisor.
That's a good
And then, of course, if you don't have one, because that's pretty normal, if you're not working on a large production, keep it. I'd say if you don't know the answer, keep it. But if you're a lone ranger, if you're doing your own in-house productions, if you're shooting your own documentaries and you know what you're going to use, and you don't need an advanced grading pipeline, because that's most of the time what all the sidecar files are for, then just pull out those MP4s. As soon as you work with RAW, keep everything, just for archival purposes. You might not need it today, but who knows that in 10 years' time, you're going to do a grade of your documentary or your film or your production, and then those files will still be valid. And they're tiny, so keep them around just for future's sake, I'd say.
So I want you to also talk a little bit about Post Labs. It's kind of in the Hedge family. It's on the website. If you go to the Hedge website, folks can see this. But I was poking around at it more today. It's a way of helping teams work remotely. Tell us more about Post Labs.
PostLab is, well, when you started out with this whole copying to avid overnight thing, and we started out with the first step backups, we always said, well, the last step between shoot and edit is the editor. And we always wanted to cover that whole range. And not per se with a whole range of tools, but sort of there has to be a common sense of going from camera into edit. It has to be easier than the current whole range of tools that you need for that. So instead of building the thing that comes next to Hedge, which is transcoding, which we are going to build next year, and include in the Hedge, we said, well, let's start with the end. We did beginning, let's now go for the end. And that's what PostLab is. So PostLab allows you to collaborate with other editors with versioning, so without conflicts. So for those that know bin locking from Avid, we also have locking for Final Cut Pro and for Premiere. You can work with two editors in the same project at the same time. PostLab will manage that for you. There's a lot of project management tools in there too. And there's also what we call shared storage for the cloud included. We call that PostLab Drive. The problem with, well, all cloud services are always built on a file basis. Dropbox is, Google Drive is, Box is. That doesn't work for video because the throughput for video is so high that you need something that's block-based, like your hard disk or your NAS. Well, your NAS is file-based, a SAN, basically. But a SAN, a lot of people don't have money for. But that's the best way to work with video. So we build a SAN in the cloud. And that's what PostLab Drive is.
Wow.
And that's built, the beauty of it is that if you, for instance, have a proxy workflow, that's a bit tuned to your connection. So obviously you're not going to stream raw from the cloud, but if you have a proper DSL connection, you definitely can do full HD proxies. You can stream those from the cloud without having to sync all the media to all editors before. So before you were sneak editing and sending out hard drives to all editors, and you had to make sure everybody was on the same file paths and file names. With PostLab, that's all managed for you, and with PostLab Drive. So it's a tool to get all the editors in, and sort of becomes the central tool to build your production around. And then Hedge will integrate with that too, and then you can do archives. And then, so we think there's no way around remote collaboration anymore. Even if you're on your own, you're going to be in different locations. You need a central place in the cloud to work off, instead of carrying this hard drive with you all the time, because that's a single point of failure. Right. So PostLab really aims at making it easy to work together in Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, and we're adding Avid and Resolve coming year.
Nice, very cool.
Awesome.
Andrew, any other questions or anybody chiming in on the live with comments?
Yeah, so I know we're about 10 minutes, so we're gonna let you guys go for today. But Jay was in the chat here, and he was asking just questions on hard drive speeds. And I know that's something that even for me has been, sometimes it's like there's so many different options out there, different brands, things like that. Is there kind of like some recommendations on drive speeds for, like, obviously there's storage drives, which are usually not the fastest. What do you guys recommend for like backup drives? And then also for like editing, that kind of workflow, is there any specific drive and drive speeds for different parts of the process that people should keep in mind?
I don't think there's a lot of difference between vendors, because in the end, it's all about the SSD or the HDD that's inside the unit. Mm-hmm. What you got to keep in mind is that if you pay peanuts, you're going to get monkeys. So a lot of people think, well, I'm going to buy this Thunderbolt 3 device, but there's a spinning disk inside. A spinning disk cannot perform well on Thunderbolt 3. It's not going to give you Thunderbolt 3 speeds. So you got to think of it as two devices. Like, is my interconnect Thunderbolt 2, Thunderbolt 3, USB-C? Does that suffice what I need speed-wise? And is the actual device inside fast enough to deliver that speed? If you need something that's faster than 300 MB per second, you're definitely not going to cut it with an HDD or even an HDD in RAID mode. You'll need to go to an SSD. When do you need to go to a larger RAID is when you need to write and read at the same time. So you need to sustain both speeds. a single disk or a 2-disk system can't deliver that. So for most of the time, simple USB-C drives suffice. But if you think about throughput and you think about how fast do I need to move data onto this drive and off of it again, that's when you start scaling up to RAID systems, Thunderbolt 3, 10 gig E even nowadays with the Mac Minis. All the components are pretty good nowadays, really. A Thunderbolt 3 device is a Thunderbolt 3 device. And sure, there are some shitty out there. Test them. That helps. Send them back if they don't suffice. There's always going to be a bit of leeway between models. We are fans of GTEC personally, because those have a really broad range of small SSDs that are super fast to larger ones, to encrypted ones, to large RAID systems, which are blazingly fast. And they might feel like they're super expensive, like all larger RAID systems cost a few grand. That's what they do. It's not expensive. It's with the speed you pay for. Right. If you see how fast those systems can move data, that will save you a lot of OT if you're in such a production where you need to save on OT. So I can't recommend a specific brand or a model. Just make sure the interconnect matches up with what's actually inside the device. So don't fall in the trap of buying a Thunderbolt 3 device or a USB-C or USB-C 3.2 device with a spinning disk inside, because that's not going to work. It's convenient because it's the same plug that's on your computer, but it's not going to fly.
Gotcha. That's a really good note. Yeah. Awesome. So that's kind of all the questions. I feel like we really touched on quite a lot of what we were planning to talk about with this. So Paul or JC, any final thoughts for people on backups or offloading, just kind of that whole process?
I think the question everybody will be getting in the future from customers is, can't you upload straight to the cloud? And then the standard answer is, that's way too slow. Upload speeds are way too slow. I think that's another case of thinking about it the wrong way. You don't, if you start uploading, just like with offloading, if you start uploading early, it's perfectly possible to go to the cloud, or to create small proxies and upload those first, and then create a bit of time for yourself there. So there's always a way to go to the cloud if a customer wants it. There always is. And that's going to be the main topic for the coming years, I think, because so many people want dailies online, for instance.
Yeah, especially, I mean, now we're in a post-COVID world. I feel like with so much the kind of decentralization of workflows and things like that, whether it's editors or even production, like you said, with dailies and things like that. Yeah, that's a really good point. JC, any final words?
Nope. I think we've covered a lot of the stuff. I just want to make sure that folks get the information on the discount for Hedge.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I should actually double check this to make sure I have the information correct before I say it out loud. But yeah, so Paul and the team there at Hedge was really gracious, and they gave us a discount for you guys. So if I remember correctly, it's 15% off for anyone who, basically what you need to do is go and send an email to Motion University at hedge.video. And that's kind of like an automated process that will get you the discount code through that. So if nothing else, at the end of the day, they have a free trial. So if you're kind of new to this and you haven't really experienced how it can help your workflow, go to their website, hedge.video, and check it out there. And I think you'll probably be hooked. So again, if you want the
don't
discount,
forget to send us any questions. Like we love questions. So don't hesitate. If there's anything you don't understand or anything that you need some help with, or your workflow, or in doubt, just send us an email or Twitter DM, and we'll always help out.
Perfect. Awesome. Is there a best email for people to reach out to you guys at?
Yeah, hello@hedge.video works.
Perfect. Awesome. So again, discount code was send an email to Motion University at hedge.video, and you'll get that 15% off discount code. So yeah, thanks again, Paul. Appreciate you taking the time coming on. I know it's late where you are over there, so I appreciate you making that happen. JC,
thanks for having me,
for coming on as well. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, we're also going to be following up like we usually do with our live videos. We'll create an Instagram carousel, kind of a recap and some of the data. We may even put together a blog post kind of recapping some of this stuff. I know Hedge, the blog, you guys have a lot of good information over there. And so we'll kind of link to a bunch of those resources and stuff once this is all said and done. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. Actually, I'm just going to double check to make sure there was any final notes for anybody. Oh, clarification. Do they need to buy it and then send you the email, or send you the email and then get the code to check out?
Yeah, just email us and we'll send you a code.
Perfect.
And try the trial first.
Yeah.
It's 10 days. You get oozes of time.
Perfect.
Give it a go first.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, we're going to let these people go that are watching live. Thanks again for joining, everybody. We appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon. And yeah, with that, we're going to let you guys go. So take care. Have a great rest of your day.